Welcome to VNN. We have with us today MP Tom Kmiec, the Conservative Shadow Minister for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, and an active voice in our parliament on many crucial issues. Tom Kmiec was born in Poland and immigrated to Canada in the mid-1980s. He studied at Concordia University in Montreal and obtained a master's degree from Regent University in Virginia, United States. MP Tom Kmiec is serving his third term representing Calgary Shepherd. He is an advocate for Canada to support the oppressed Uyghur population in China's Xinjiang region and is also part of the Parliamentary Friends of the Kurdish People. The topic of international students has become a major issue in Canada because of the sheer numbers involved and the huge problems they face on many fronts. Let us hear from MP Kmiec about the vulnerabilities and exploitation they face here. Welcome to VNN, MP.
Thanks, Bella. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, there have been alarming news reports of international students, mainly from South Asia or India, being issued fraudulent college acceptance letters by dishonest consultants to study in Canada. Are there any figures available for this?
So it's hard to tell right now. Some of the numbers I've seen are as high as 700, but the potential could be much higher because I've seen people say that this defrauding. So these are fraudulent consultants. It was malicious what they did. These international students are really innocent in all this. They had no way of knowing, even though they hired this person to act on their behalf in good faith. So it could be hundreds, but I would not. I would ignore the potential that it could be thousands of people affected. They just don't know yet. Like this could be in the future, right? That we could discover that these people, when they apply for PR status. So the problem is that these acceptance letters that were issued to them were fakes, but they were real colleges. So, I have some of them on my desktop. They're like Seneca College, Humber College. These are real colleges in Canada who unknowingly, at least as far as I know, unknowingly were being also defrauded. These admissions letters look very real. I've even looked at them. They look very real. And the thinking is that IRCC should have been double checking with the colleges. And I suspect they had to have been doing this, but I have an email that one of the international students provided to one of my caucus colleagues that's between CBSA and one of the colleges that shows they only verified 3 years after the fact. And the only time you actually get caught is when you apply for permanent residency. So it could be many more people who are facing this situation, but they'll only know about it when they apply for permanent residency.
I mean, besides these bogus consultants in India and maybe in Canada too, there are fraudulent colleges also and other institutions, like they're just visa factories. I mean, one-room universities or one-room colleges. I mean, there's quite a mushrooming of those, isn't it?
It's quite possible. So when your visa is issued for a study permit, there's a number there for designated institution on your visa, and it provides the number and the province you're in as an acronym for your province and an enumeration system for it. That's issued by IRCC. Now, when IRCC issues you a study permit, they're supposed to do their due diligence. Like the government of Canada is supposed to do all of the enforcement work at the beginning to make sure you are in fact a student, that you are in fact accepted at a recognized college or post-secondary institution in Canada. Like the government has a responsibility towards the applicants to make sure it's correct, and has a responsibility towards you, towards me, towards every citizen of Canada to make sure the people we let enter have a reason to enter here that is lawful and legitimate. And in the case of study permits, that they are actually going to be studying an institution. And this is a problem created entirely by the Liberals. There were problems before, like pre-2015, but they weren't this scale. They weren't of this size. And that's because we have a huge population of international students now in Canada. And I suspect that the department has had a big difficulty in actually enforcing the rules from I want to say a lack of resources, but this department has doubled the number of staff and doubled its budget since 2015. So they have enough resources, they have enough money to make sure that these students are not defrauded.
I mean, shouldn't there be some vetting at the source also, say in India or Philippines or wherever they are, There should be some sort of investigation there too, isn't it?
Well, we're hoping to, but the only thing that's happened so far is last week on Friday, um, the minister, Sean Fraser, put out a series of tweets saying that they were looking into it. But they must have known this problem was happening for months, if not years, because these hearings and the inadmissibility of these international students, once they applied for PR status, his department must have briefed them and told them that this was going on, that this was an increasing problem that they were seeing, and more of these deportation hearings were being held. Now, if he didn't know, I want to say, like, that sounds like it's incompetence on their side, but to put out a series of tweets with no firm action plan on what you're going to do is a little ridiculous. And then the next thing, Bala, is really important is we conservatives moved at Immigration Committee twice this week to go and study this international students issue and the defrauding of these students. Twice we moved motions at the Immigration Committee to study this issue, and twice the Liberals and the NDP in their coalition deal adjourned the debate. They stopped us debating. They silenced the Conservatives who wanted to hear from the students. We wanted to call the colleges, but we also want the Immigration Department and Canadian Border Services Agency to come and explain themselves on exactly what happened. Twice now they've silenced us. We have a third Immigration Committee today. And we're not going to stop until these students are heard.
Can officials be compelled to testify before the committee?
Absolutely, they have a responsibility. In our parliamentary system, the civil service, the bureaucrats, are supposed to be held accountable by parliamentarians, and the committees is how we do this, being held to account. They are not allowed to claim that it's operational reasons they can't disclose information. They must disclose the truth at committee.
So why is the standing committee not doing anything? What's the reason they give?
You have to ask the Liberals and NDP why they keep shutting down us moving towards studying this issue. Last week, we sent a letter calling for an emergency meeting of the committee. They could have, set up an emergency meeting as early as Monday. The committee right now is reviewing a Citizenship Act amendments legislation, which is fine. That's why we wanted to dual track it. We could do two things at the same time. We could do the Citizenship Act review in S245, which we're undertaking right now, and we could do an emergency meeting for these international students, because some of them were finding themselves facing deportation as early as this past Monday. And there are others who are being deported this week. Now, I know at least in one case, the federal court found in her favor, and I think did a stay of deportation for 3 months. But what the government is doing here is the Liberal MPs on the committee are stalling us calling in witnesses and calling in the international students before they get deported. What we've called for is a stay of deportations until they can be witnesses before the committee. The government is deporting witnesses that we desperately need to hear from, because we need their testimony on the record, official testimony of these international students, and the Liberal MPs and the NDP MP on this committee are blocking that from happening.
It's quite a tragic thing, because they spend about $40,000 or $50,000 just to get into Canada after paying all their agents and consultants. It is not their fault. So what happens to them now?
So the stays of deportation, those that's the ask of the part of my political movement, and my leader, the Honorable Pierre Poliver, has been very clear that these international students were defrauded. CBSA has a responsibility to go through these inadmissibility hearings. We thought a temporary stay of deportation until we could get more information. The important thing is we don't have all the information. The department knows what's going on. So this is why these parliamentary hearings are so important. I don't know what happened exactly. I have some of the information from international students. So we have one part of the story, but IRCC, since last Friday, since these tweets from the minister, hasn't released more information. They haven't proactively reached out to me. I sent a letter to the minister raising the case of these students on May 26th with the vice chair of the committee. They haven't responded to us. They haven't given us more information. Every single international student, every parent, every uncle, every auntie, every person out there who is here should wonder, how is it possible that these people, one is that they could be defrauded like this and the department didn't catch these fraudulent letters at the beginning? That's one. Two is, how is it that only years afterwards were there verifications being done on whether these admission letters were true to form, that they were actually real admissions letters? Like 3 years, I have an email string of 3 years after the fact verifying whether the admissions letters was correct. When you landed here as an international student, you were then informed by this malicious consultant that you had to change your college. Well, then you have to inform IRCC, I'm told. When IRCC was informed, why didn't they do anything? Why didn't they verify? Why didn't they inform the student? Was the minister informed? Did the minister know even years ago that there were maybe potentially hundreds, maybe dozens, maybe thousands of these international students being fraud? There's so many questions to ask, and we're being blocked from asking them.
And I mean, many of these students who come here, I mean, they're supposed to pass their IELTS exams, but they still cannot speak English. How did they pass and get in here? I mean, is somebody else writing the exams for them? That's what the people in the community say. They're being somebody else writes the exam and they get in here.
I mean, those are great questions. You know, when I came to Canada, I didn't even speak English or French. I didn't even know those two languages existed when I came to Canada. I was so young. I was almost 5 years old. You know, it is a big undertaking to learn a new language, especially when it's your second or third one, right? And when you take these exams, what I've heard from some members from different cultural communities is that people are literally using, you know, Adobe Photoshop and photoshopping the letter, or someone else is, they take the test and maybe they don't score as well, but then they're being given this fraudulent IELTS passage and it has a different number on it. So there are different ways of providing fraudulent information like it. Some people are doing it maliciously, and I know now I'm worried that they're not being caught. And some people in good faith, they don't know that the IELTS they're given or the TOEFL they're given is inaccurate, is a wrong number when they're providing it. But that's why you and I pay taxes to a department that has 12,000 people working for it. That's just IRCC, with a budget over $5 billion to do their job and catch these people. How is it possible that they weren't caught?
And how many members are on the committee?
There are, including the chair, I believe there are 12 members of the committee. Are 4 Conservatives, 1 Bloc member, 1 NDP, and there are 6 Liberals.
Okay, so they are the majority there, and they can shut anything down there.
Well, with what happens is the Liberals have 5 members who are able to vote. The chair is a member of the Liberal Party, elected duly, and the NDP has been voting in a coalition deal with the Liberals at every single meeting.
You know, and then there have been reports of appearing in local newspapers also. Many of these students getting into drug trafficking, drug abuse, and prostitution just to survive in Canada. I mean, there are, I don't know, reports of 5 to 6 deaths of these students every month in Toronto itself. And so the scale is quite large. I mean, can't the police or the RCMP act in this regard?
So that I see the stories sometimes. Many of us Conservative MPs, we talk about these at our weekly meetings about how these international students, but also many other newcomers to Canada, are being sold the Canadian dream, and then Canada's not able to live up to that salesmanship that we do. So the government likes to go around and say how attractive we are, a destination for international students and other immigrants. We know that half of those immigrants afterwards, within a few years, they go back to their country of origin. They say, this is not what I signed up to. I just had one gentleman tell me that 2 newcomer families on his own street went back to their country of origin and said, this isn't working for me. This is not what I signed up for. Of those half that stay, you know, since 2015, about 75 to 80% of permanent residents took on Canadian citizenship. They became Canadians. That's the whole point of immigration to Canada. We want you to become a citizen of Canada. Now it's less than half of them become Canadian citizens years afterwards, after they pass their test and take the oath. That is the Liberal record on immigration. Canada is a more difficult place to make a living. Everything is more expensive. Rent is more expensive. Mortgages are more expensive. It's harder as an international student to find a place to rent, to finish your studies, and to work at the same time to make a living. It's incredibly difficult. And so I don't blame them for falling into, you know, the drug trade. And it's so sad to hear these stories of people falling into prostitution. It's so incredibly sad to hear these stories, because that is not the Canadian dream when my parents came to Canada, when I came to Canada. That is not the dream of Canada. The dream of Canada is that every newcomer, you work hard, you pay your taxes, you make an honest day's work, and Canada will give back to you just as you give to Canada. And that's not what's happened over the last few years. Rents have doubled, mortgages have doubled. 1.5 million people are going to food banks. Many of those are international students. And that's what the Liberals have done with our immigration system, because they never had a plan at the beginning. So many of these people then find themselves in the Canadian experience class pool waiting, and their scores are not over 500, even though the department keeps claiming that the minimum score is say 460 or 465, but the averages are over 500. That's a very difficult score to get, and people wait years to become permanent residents of Canada to get some stability in their lives. So this is the record that the Liberals have, and we Conservatives have a plan to improve on things, by making sure we don't overspend and feed the inflation that is driving up grocery prices. That has a huge impact on international students. But also, we got to make sure that the immigration department is doing its job on the front end and protecting international students so they're not defrauded by malicious consultants overseas. But also, when they do come here, that all of these colleges, that they have the housing necessary to make sure that they can provide for these international students, so they don't overdo it, so you don't have international students going all around into their local communities trying to find a place to live. Like, people have to be, these communities have to be both reasonable, and I mean the colleges, not the international students come here. These colleges have to be reasonable. When you're taking on tens of thousands of international students into one region, do you have a plan? Have you talked to the local mayor and city council? Is there enough private housing? And on the flip side, all of these newcomers that we have coming to Canada, we got to make sure that they can work as engineers, as doctors, as dentists. We got to make sure that the skilled trades are recognized. We have the red seal already. We want the blue seal for medical professionals. There is so much broken in Canada. We Conservatives keep raising this point is because we hear it from different communities that things are broken. So we want to fix it. And the only way we can get it done at this point is making sure we keep the pressure on this government in June before the session ends, so they start addressing those problems immediately, because they just don't care.
Unfortunately, for those students coming from India, especially, there are reports that it is Indo-Canadian employers and landlords who are exploiting them. And then it should become a police case, actually, these investigations.
Yeah, so I mean, the community needs to keep reaching out to local police services and launching complaints, and that this is an area where the community knows more than parliamentarians in Ottawa know. So you need to keep communicating with us, providing us the information, providing us proof, and then we can start working on behalf of different communities in Canada, newcomers. And like, my expectation is newcomers become Canadian citizens. That's the great part about Canada. We're all equal here, and there's an opportunity to make a living, to raise a family, find good, meaningful work, and raise a family and make a contribution to Canada by becoming a Canadian citizen. That Canadian dream is what we want to restore.
What is your immediate plan now? What is the next step immediately?
So right now we have another immigration committee meeting today. We're going to continue to try and complete the legislative work on this law that's called S-245 from the Senate. We want to make sure we do our due diligence on it. We're not going to let go on the necessity of having additional meetings. Parliamentarians, Conservatives on the committee, want to keep fighting for international students. I put on notice in the last meeting, officially on the record, that calling on the committee to report back to Parliament that there should be a temporary stay of deportation of international students. I haven't yet decided whether today will be the day that I will move that motion, because I want the other committee members to agree with me, and I would like the Liberal MPs and NDP MPs on the committee to stop blocking us passing motions that have direction. They're not legal force of law, but they give an intent directly to Parliament and to the government that we want to see action happen, and they keep blocking us so far. So we're going to keep fighting for international students today, but we have to do important legislative work to make sure we get it right. But we can do things at the same time, and if we can have this extra meeting today, there's no reason why the chair cannot call an emergency meeting of the committee to consider the case of these international students.
Yesterday, the minister announced that there was a new process for immigration. For getting newcomers, skilled newcomers will be given priority in getting their permanent residence.
So I'm still reviewing the details of that announcement, because the minister doesn't provide me a heads up or individualized briefing before they make an announcement or even afterwards. So I'm still looking into the details of how this is going to work. But I'm sorry, Bala, but these people have a 2 million application backlog. It was 2.9 million at the end of the pandemic. It was over 2 million going into the pandemic. This doesn't sound like it's going to fix the underlying structural systemic problem that they have. Is if you're going to announce speeding up of immigration only for certain people, then I'd like to know who's being left behind. Who are the ones who are not going to have their spot and their consideration in the queue? If what you're doing is speeding up, that means other people are going to wait longer. You know, spousal sponsorships from Turkey and Iran. So Iranian spousal sponsorship at Ankara visa processing office, some of those are waiting over 5 years. That's not fair to these people. Are they being left to the back of the queue then? We have, you know, we're still trying to reach 40,000 Afghan refugees by end of year. The government is just over 30,000. Are they going to be left to wait at the back of the queue? They should be addressing the backlog of over 2 million immigration case files that are still waiting in the queue. And again, this doesn't help Hong Kongers who have no clear path to permanent residency in Canada because the open work permit stream B is not coordinated with the permanent residency requirements. There are so many issues structural, and the government keeps announcing new programs. You know, yesterday at committee, we were told there's a 12-month processing time for spousal sponsorship. That's not true. The department gave us information March 2023. It takes 16 months to process it, 13 months for grandparents. There are so many issues with current programs the government doesn't want to address, but it keeps announcing new ones to try and convince different communities in Canada and Canadians that they know what they're doing. And I'm convinced they don't know what they're doing.
Has that Quebec crossing been completely closed now? It's been shut?
So the information that I have is that the initial protocol on the Safe Third Countries Agreement so far is working. If you let me, I'm going to tilt my head because I have it on the whiteboard here. I can tell you exactly the number that I have. As of April, in April, there was 69 illegal border crossings. Months before, there were well over 4,000 people that were crossing. So it's down to 69, so it worked. And I'll remind you, Bala, when conservatives called for the border to be closed, liberals came out and said you couldn't do this. It wasn't that easy. It was way more complicated. They implied that conservatives were uncompassionate, that we were unreasonable, that we hadn't thought it through, that we didn't do anything. And then wouldn't you know it, Bala? The border closed within 30 days. On March 25th, magically, the border closed. In fact, the Liberal government knew it was going to close on March 25th because they signed the deal a year before. They signed the deal a year before in official documents filed in the United States Federal Register on Regulations that they had already signed this deal. They always knew it was going to close, but had never disclosed it to Parliament and never disclosed it to conservatives on our side of the House. So it can be done. If you have the will, there is a way to make sure our laws are enforced. We're a sovereign country. We have borders. We can enforce our borders. So as of April, yes, it is true, Bala. There are only 69. That number seems to be low, and it will likely be going down. That 69, by the way, is just for Quebec. It's, I think, 85 or 86 for all of Canada, but the border is now officially closed.
And most of those people who came through there are not real refugees. They're coming with expensive luggage and expensive clothes. And they're not.
So in that case, the Immigration Refugee Board actually has statistics that they post on asylum seekers, and it's true that less than half of them are approved. The last number I have is 47% were approved as convention refugees, protected persons who were allowed to stay in Canada, and 53% were rejected.
Anyway, it's been a very interesting conversation, MP Kmiec. Thank you for sharing your perspective on this subject with us, and our viewers will have a better understanding of the issue. Thank you again, and all the best in the committee meeting. Hope some resolution comes out of this.
Thank you very much.